Hi, I'm Bryony Collins. I'm a writer based in Bangor in North Wales. I've written Blame It On Me and All That Glisters that are out with Broken Sleep Books, and my next book, The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees, is forthcoming with them in April next year. And I am one of the co-founding editors of Cape magazine. I'm going to start by reading a poem from this collection, Blame It On Me. It came out with Broken Sleep in August 2020? 2021, not 2020. And it's called Dead Badger. So. Our cousinhood can be pared down to a precious morning in July '06. Sitting on a bunk in a cabin of a blue canal boat called Frisbee. You were barely 2, your knowledge of language a reduction of milk and motherhood, of rhyme and room. On paper, your mind unfurled in the wild etchings of a child with stories to tell, but no words, until you pressed your palms to the window so hard they turned flat and white, smiled at a passing boat and proclaimed a single triumphant syllable, "Bot." A dead badger bobbed by us in the water, its fur muddied to conceal the white stripes of its face among the black ones. "Bot," you said again, as solemn and as still as the canal, and I knew you were really asking if I saw it too. This is all language is, touching other people's worlds with our visions, hoping that someone knows what you mean and understands. But you taught me that poetry is everything else, the words we never learn and the ones left unsaid.
The most magnificent hair I will ever see catches sunlight and gift his back as copper. Montbretius, bloom against your skin, roots that burgeon deeper than blood. I love how you describe your mother and your memories of her. Are the poems about your late mother a way of communicating with her?
In a sense, yes, but it's very much a monologue, because when you're writing to or about, or even in some instances from a person who's no longer living, you're very hyper aware of the fact that you will not receive a reply. And so I wouldn't perhaps say communicating with, but perhaps communicating to. And certainly as I have grown, she passed away 21 years ago now. There's been an accumulation of things that she's missed, parts of my life that I feel as though I need to update her on. And while she is very static in what I can learn from her, there's still always that sense of learning and growth in just sharing to somebody who can't respond. And so perhaps yes, but communicating too. This next piece is from my forthcoming poetry book, my third book with Broken Sleep. It's out April 2023, and it's called The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees. And this is just a small poem from that book called What is Real. Beyond the forest is a lake where water snakes buckle in boat wakes, and mothers, eggless, jelly their young direct into the dark pool. I drown into being. The living swim in the ridges of my brain. No time for flinching, I rise. the lake pours itself into day.
So, second question. Can you remember the exact moment when you first felt like writing a poem?
That's a difficult question because I have been writing and telling stories as long as I can remember. Probably before I could speak, I was babbling away. And I think I was probably already writing poetry at this point, but I do have a distinct memory of when I was living in Wyoming. I had a back bedroom and it overlooked this, the yard and this sort of shed we had. And there was this just blackbird on the shed. And I remember thinking how animals, a lot of the times in the animal kingdom, they're born and they're already equipped with skills, they're already, they have these instincts and they know what they're doing. There are birds that hatch and know how to fly. And I think I must have been about 16, 17 at the time. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't know anything. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to achieve any goals. I know I want to write, that I like writing, but I'm really bad at it. And I still have my old journals from that age, so I can confirm completely unbiased I was awful. But I remember thinking, if I want the things later on in life to have that kind of artist life and to be doing these things, I need to start right now. And I think a lot of times perhaps creatives fall into this trap of only practicing what they're good at because it feels good. And so taking that first plunge into doing what I was bad at until I became good at it was really hard. But I think perhaps I owe quite a lot of my career to that blackbird. This is from The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees also, and it is called Extraterrestrial. Aren't we all gamblers? He likes lotto cards and discolouring fists with mandibles. Is it self-harm if? I don't know myself. The wall is hard against my skull. Sunlight bleached space blue carpets. Bright prawn nebula. Aren't we all if? I stop making any sense. This is the first time out of body. Gravity loosens. He holds the top of a cola bottle in front of me. Focus on the colour, the shape. Bright prawn nebula on space blue carpets. The walls are stars. Aren't we all gamblers? Is it self-harm? Out of body?
Among your influences include Forrest Gander, Denise Riley and Panu Kapil, all very different in their way, but significant in the way they chart places and bodies. I'd love to know a little more about how they may have inspired you.
I think, well, I don't want to use discovered because I didn't discover them. They were thriving when I stumbled across them. But yes, I sort of found them at the right moment in my life, in my writing journey. There's a big seed. Forrest Gander visited Bangor University in 2019, I think, and he read from his collection Be With, which he no longer reads. Actually, he doesn't want to perform his grief anymore, is what he says. And he probably came in my second year at uni, and that was before I wrote Blame It On Me about my mother's passing. And I think he really opened me up to being able to write about something like that through my own sort of body and lived experiences, making grief a tangible, concrete thing made it so much easier to access, and kind of made me realise my body is the thing that I share with my mother and will always share. I am part her, and that opened me up to that sort of writing. And then in researching that, I started looking at Denise Riley, and her book Say Something Back was really, really crucial to me. The title alone says it all. What do you do when you have all these feelings and experiences and things to say, and the person you're telling them to can't give you anything in response? And so that again is another sort of experience within bodies and within places. You have to source those answers within yourself and within your own environment, because they're not going to come in from any other external source when you're speaking to someone or something who can't respond. And then, yes, Banu Kapil, I read Schizophrene for my master's dissertation, and obviously she was writing about immigrants, and so I didn't want to kind of capitalise on that narrative at all. It's not mine, but her language, the sort of textures and dexterity of language, and the way she creates this relationship between body and place, between physical location and culture, and then even a lack of location and the kind of mental after effects of that. The absence of one can lead to absences in another, really sort of propelled me into this idea of what if my grief was a space that I could experience and interact with. And so I feel like each writer has given me different questions and different things to think about that I'm always playing with and trying to progress in my work, but very much just through my own personal life. I'm going to read a little now from a book that I'm working on at the moment. It's called Maiden Voyage, and it is set on a Viking longship, and I use the ship and Old Norse culture and words to discuss my sexuality, as paganism is very important to me, and it's sort of uncharted territory for me, and it feels very much like a voyage. So I'm going to read some of what I've been doing there, and it is very much a first look, so an exclusive perhaps. So this is the start of Maiden Voyage. In the middle of the sea, I drop this poem. What am I? And watch it go, it goes like this. The longboat shudders its keel, rears itself to cut the wave. A raven sits on the bow, Hrafn, with its oil spill feathers, beak hooked to fish directions from a night as thin as wind. Hrafn blinks to cut into salt dark, room gathering in corners, eclipsed by a membrane. Hrafn. I steer this vessel, moon-starched epidermis and fatty tissue, but these waters are new. What am I? What are I? Are eyes black as beaches, a creature calling, oh gods, gods, define me. Even when I was building, still stripping back the oak from, sanding against the timbers from, laying out the board bones from, then looking at the skeleton spread, a devolution into what was and saw. Even when I was crafting, hammering crude thunder into, nails threatening to shout splinters into, wood learning to bend into, I tugged moss from rocks, ripped up the forest's carpet, those same soft bryophytes, bryo kneaded down and dried, once cupped vulvas, drank in their blooms. Even when I was stuffing, wedging tarred sphagnum between planks and cursing spaces between, brushing black forest sealant between. Gods, have you ever wanted to touch both moss and oak? Even when I knew and saw. Hrafn etches memories in the deck with his talons. Do you remember this? It was raining. She wore purple. I bring a sprig of lavender with me to make the boat smell of her, to dandruff me in pollen, so I might have some use in this world, an apparatus for bees. I looked at her and wondered. Hrafn clicks his slick black beak and begins to peck between the boat boards, into the watertight tar and moss. I scream at him to stop because he knows, he knows. I wondered if I could and what that would make me.
Your second pamphlet, which is going to be your third book, is out in spring 2023 by Broken Sleep Books. I'd love to find out about its principal themes.
Yeah, I think perhaps the biggest themes are, time and space, but that's huge, so I'll narrow it down a little. It's called The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees, and it's in some ways an extension of Blame It On Me, which is my first poetry book about the loss of my mother and I suppose emotional loss of my father. And so The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees takes those two losses and shows how a lack of parental role models, or perhaps toxic parental role models, can lead to highly dysfunctional adult relationships. And so The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees documents the last 12 months out of an abusive relationship I was in. And it's framed around sort of letter poems to my mum, one for each month of the year, and there are poems between that fill this narrative of what was going on. And so time is very important in that book, because it's time without something, time lived without a person there, and how that absence growing can fuel absences in other areas, but also this chronological time moving forwards, and how things evolve and fall apart. But in addition to that, there are, I suppose, a couple of locations where it takes place. There's one very much grounded in the real world, in me, my day-to-day life. There's a poem where I'm washing the dishes, which sounds boring, but I promise it's fantastic. And there's poems that take place in a more surreal landscape, in this forest that is entirely imagined, and it's a physical location that serves as a metaphor for trauma and my mental health at the time, which was virtually non-existent. And so cutting between these different spaces and these different timelines really allows for this wider scope of exploring mental illness and toxicity in relationships. So I would say time and space, all of it are the main themes. I'm going to read a bit of prose now from my latest book, All That Glisters. This came out earlier this year in March with Broken Sleep Books, and it's my first prose book. It's 4 short stories, and I'm just going to read the start of the last story. It's called Hoard Her. Here's a secret. Rory McCullen was terrified of dying. It would happen any day now, he was sure of it. Though the fear came to him most nights, it wasn't on his mind at the moment. Currently, he was scanning the specials on the front of the restaurant's menu. After he ordered, much to the bemusement of his friends, Rory took his Elvis Presley mug out of his satchel and placed it on the table in front of him. Raising a slow, shaking finger, he beckoned to the waiter, who had already moved on to taking the others' orders. "Yes?" the waiter asked. "I'd like some milk too, in my mug, if you please," Rory said. If the waiter was surprised, he didn't show it, or at least Rory didn't notice, as he obliged, and as soon as he finished noting down the rest of the orders, off he went. Taking the gaudy mug with him, the waiter went off in search of some milk. Rory didn't see his friends tut and exchange looks between themselves, which suggested silently that they wished he would show a little more decorum in public. The truth was that Rory simply didn't have any gauge for social awkwardness or poor etiquette whatsoever. Most people can detect cues that dictate how they ought to behave in a given situation, but this just wasn't a skill Rory ever learned. He lived in his own world, his existence only crossing over into reality in the moments when he thought he might die. It was hard to say at what point Rory began to think so morbidly. He never felt especially in tune with life. Rory lived in the space between 2 glass plates of a double-glazed window. He saw the world, but couldn't touch it. His skin frosted with breath and traces of other people, but he remained out of reach, always on the other side of some invisible partition. Perhaps it would have been easier for Rory to maintain a grip on serenity if he lived with someone else. The world was a lonely place for an old man to spend his final years. It wasn't a lack of common sense that prevented him from suppressing these dark thoughts. He knew that death was a statistical guarantee, but it was an intrusive shadow that ate away at the sunshine of all his days. Another soul could split a burden such as this, but Rory had ever only been in love once, and that was a long time ago. Her name was Simone. The waiter returned with the Elvis Presley mug as full as milk as he could manage without spilling it as he carried it back to Rory. It wasn't until Rory took his first sip that he realised he didn't know what the waiter looked like. He never raised his eyes to his face. That happened sometimes when he was speaking to someone. He would simply forget to look at them. "Your eyes are like boys," Simone said. "They're stuck in place, but still drifting up and down, never resting, never really a fixture of the sea." She said lots of things that Rory didn't really understand, and this was one of them. It was more the way she said it that intrigued him. Always with her dark curls bowing into her heart-shaped face, that broad forehead and pointed chin, and a smile so delicate that it may as well not be there at all. He saw her in parts like that, but unable to take in her whole appearance at once, as though he could only have a piece of her at a time. His friends at dinner were speaking about the news. Rory sat at the head of the table, with the two sets of couples on either of the longest sides. On his right, Rose was growing animated as she explained the story. She wore 3 thick gold bangles on her left wrist, and they clanged against everything. Her enthusiastic gesticulations were punctuated by the reverberations of gold on gold, or the sharp knock of the metal on the wooden table. As she spoke, it was hard to take his eyes off her mouth, which was framed by the brightest lipstick Rory had ever seen in his life. It was so colourful that it was easy to notice where it had seeped beyond the outline of her lips into the subtle wrinkles around them as tiny scarlet veins no wider than hairs. "But did you hear why he did it?" Rose said, her bangles smacking together. "They say his wife—" "She left him," Andrew, her husband, finished. "Excuse me, you brute. I was telling it. Yes, she left him, took the children and ran off to her mother's place in Dorset. Dorset of all places. Andrew!" "Right. She left him because he was obviously unhinged now, wasn't he?" "Right, you nuisance. Why don't you tell it?" Rose snapped at Andrew. "Go on, finish the story." "Okay, yes, well, actually that's it, isn't it?" Yes, that is it. Absolutely typical. I wish you'd run off to bloody Dorset."
A subtle, at times more visible feminist theme runs through some of your poems. I'd love to know more about this element of highlighting political issues close to your heart through poetry. Is there more of this to come?
There's definitely more to come. Politics in poetry is a strange relationship for me. I never set out trying to write something political. I never try to create an overarching message or statement or declaration, because I think those things come through very naturally when you're just writing about your personal life. That is what people connect to, this personal quality more than political. And I find these days more than ever people are so sick of politics. I certainly am. But it can't help but pervade my poetry, and definitely feminism. And I'm very interested in feminism, not completely as this huge movement, this huge necessary movement for all gender equality, but as a daily decision. I find that many women are faced with these very small acts of feminism every single day, and that's where I want to be writing. I mentioned I have a poem about washing the dishes, and I find that that to me, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm taking care of the house, I'm doing housework when I should be doing real work, jobs and all this, and it creates this dichotomy in my mind of fulfilling a traditional role and fulfilling a more progressive role, and I think this is something that a lot of people experience every single day, this conflict, well, I've only got time to do this thing, and if I don't do this chore, no one else is going to do it. I think feminism is an ongoing back and forth that takes place in the lives of people every single day in these really small, seemingly insignificant ways, and that's where I think the really interesting focus for poetry is, not in these grand political debates, but in these more personable, smaller areas. And so I definitely want to be exploring that in work to come. Where are your parents? Oh,
Oh, that's
hello. I've got a fan.
yeah. Thistle and him.
That was nice.
Yeah.
I'll reintroduce it, shall I?
Could do.
Could do. We could keep that in. I will reintroduce it because it's quite serious, I think. Yes. I'm going to read a piece now from The Birds, the Rabbits, the Trees. This piece does come with a content warning for themes of sexual assault. I actually first wrote about this for a Vociferous Press anthology, my bad. And I wrote anonymously in that anthology. It was for anonymous victims. And so this is the first time that I'm writing about this incident with my name attached to it. And this is something that I want to do more of in my work, attaching my name to these lived experiences to really just shrug off any stigma or shame. So I'm going to read it now, and it is called Here Is Your Fucking Scene. We were there for your friend's wedding when the best man groped me the night before. So I didn't behave like I should when I ran upstairs crying, because he was still your mate after all. Instead, I should have palm-heeled his nose into the back of his brain, sent shards into his skull until violence poured from nostrils. I should have called you the name I was thinking and spat in your black eyes. Black like the coffee I drowned in the next morning because I stayed up until dawn in the black room, watching black shadows move against the black wall, where I waited like a fly in the corner for him to return and eviscerate me, all legs and eyes, finishing what he started. I should have grabbed the beer bottle on the table and crowned him with the broken pieces of an unconscionable statistic: 1 in 5 women. And then I should have kicked him after he slumped on the floor 6 feet closer to hell. So I didn't behave like I should when I shut myself in the bedroom, while you yelled at me through the door for making a scene, or all the next day when we went to the ceremony and you told me that you loved me. That one day it would be us promising each other eternity. And the bride told me at the reception not to mind him because that's just what he's like. And that bitch at our table told me if I wasn't so passive, it wouldn't have happened. So I didn't behave like I should. But in my head, I nicked the cigarillos from your coat pocket, went outside to light one up, then set the whole building on fire too, waiting for sirens, for screams, for the blaze of my heart to die.
You are so embedded in the poetry community with editing, curating and even hosting. I'm thinking of Black poetry. I'd love to know more about this community side of you, if I can call that, to your poetry practice.
I firmly believe that community is what makes poetry happen. It's what keeps it alive, and it always has since, you know, people were first using poetry as a form to share stories, and would gather and share stories through poetry, through narrative poetry, through generations, to now where we have these pockets of sort of indie or underground communities forming, where we have really small but really engaged readerships. Community has always been the lifeblood of poetry, and so it's important, I think, there's perhaps a certain ethical unspoken code. When you withdraw something from that community, you should endeavour to pay it back at some point. And certainly in Wales, I have received so many opportunities here. I've been really lucky. I've worked with Literature Wales. I got an under 25s bursary and mentoring scheme like 2018, I think. And I've been to Tŷ Newydd a couple times, incredible writing centre. And I've had opportunities with Poetry Wales as a mentor and having work accepted, things like this. Wales has taken care of me. And so I see it very much as part of my duty, I suppose, or maybe that's too strong and formal a word, but part of my responsibility as a poet in Wales is now to acknowledge what I have received and pay that back. And so I'm, doing projects like with Black Bough, guest editing for them. Through my own publications, I run Cape Magazine, and we're launching a print house soon. To give other people opportunities that I once had, and to try and be an encouraging presence, because I think there are two different types of poetry. There's poetry that's for you, and there's poetry that you write for readers and isn't complete until it has a reader. And so with that in mind, you have to be engaged to know what those readers like, or where those readers even are, how to access them, how to engage with them, and how to form community to keep growing as poets and growing together. Yes, it is in my mind the single most important part of poetry. Right. So I'm just going to read this poem. It's called Childhood. It's in my book Blame It On Me, but it was first published by Poetry Wales in April 2020 as part of a special online edition called Stay at Home, which was put together to really encourage people to not go out and socialise at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is Childhood. Out by the lake, we played marbles on the concrete. My palms spread wide on the ground as we crouched, and grains of stone needled their way into my skin, left dents in my fingers where they should be whole. My brother sang under his breath to the last song that came through the radio in our dad's truck, snapped his best marble forward and smiled at the clack of glass on glass. Excitement exhaled through his teeth. I missed, mine rolling away and dropping off the short lip of the concrete into the grass, each blade peeling back. I tried to chase it, but it disappeared through my hands, drowning invisible to the brown earth of the lake bed.
Do you have any dream projects coming up, or maybe something that you are working on?
As per usual with me, I have several. I think I'll start with perhaps just a personal project, something I'm working on at the moment that I'm extremely excited about. I'm currently writing my first full-length poetry collection, and it will take the form of one long poem, kind of split into fragments and parts, called Maiden Voyage. And it's the first time that I am discussing my sexuality openly in my writing. I don't tend to label myself publicly, I don't really write for sort of queer magazines or the LGBT plus community. I feel that there are better ambassadors than I, and more important ambassadors than I. But as just a personal project, it's something that I'm starting to explore in my writing that's really exciting to me. And also exploring it in terms of a culture and a background that is quite unique to me. I have been more or less a lifelong pagan, and sort of Viking tradition and history and culture, not all of it, don't worry, some of it's bad, but the stories and sort of the richness of that history has always fascinated me and has been important to me, and so I'm sort of marrying an exploration into my sexuality with this concept of a Viking longship and a voyage. Viking actually is a verb that means sort of to journey. It's a journey. You go Viking, and so exploring sexuality through a journey is important to me, and incorporating Old Norse language and tradition I think will make for a fascinating concept, and I've written a fair amount at the moment, and I'm piecing it together now. But as of yet, it does not have a publisher, so we will see. But speaking of publishers, another project I am working on at the moment is myself and my friend Aaron Farrell. We run Cape Magazine together, and at the moment we are maybe a month or two away from launching our own publishing house, Atomic Bohemian, and we will each have a book out there, probably this year or early next year, and then we will be accepting submissions from anybody who wants to send us work to take on our first book project from someone else. And so we're looking to really start moving into how we can give back to this community that has supported us, how we can pursue our own dream projects while giving somebody else that opportunity. It's really exciting. We've got some good stuff on the horizon.